Our next speaker is Anil Jain. Dr. Jain is Senior VP and CMIO at Explorys. This is a big data company, local here, providing clinical research leadership for the company. Dr. Jain led the development of MyResearch application at Cleveland Clinic that was later used as the inspiration to create the Explorys platform. Dr. Jain has implemented technology strategies to leverage the electronic medical record in facilitating research at Cleveland Clinic and beyond since 1999, and evidenced in his past roles as Managing Director of E-Research, Director of Research and Quality Informatics at the Medical Institute, Cleveland, and also co-chair of the Information Management for the Better Health Greater Cleveland project. He's also has been a co-director of biomedical informatics score with our CTSC, and we have my close colleague for a couple of years. And even though Anil is with Explorys, he continues to have quite a few of active engagement and collaborative projects with us on campus. So Anil is going to talk about the big data analytics.
Neil, you can just hand me mine.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, GQ. Was it your idea for me to go after these two guys here? Well, I'm going to take a slightly different spin on this, and you notice I don't have the word informatics in my title. And the reason why I wanted to avoid the word informatics is because I think we can get into an entire discussion about what that really means, and I think Michael did a good job in terms of differentiating all the different types. I'm not sure how to describe myself, and I'm not sure how to describe exactly what we do. So I'm going to describe what we do, and you can sort of get an idea what problems we were trying to solve. So just like Brian and Michael, I have some conflicts of interest, or potential ones as well, not nearly as large. But probably the biggest conflict is that I've been involved with health IT, and I have a vested interest in promoting health IT in general. I mean, that's one of the biggest conflicts. But also I'm a practicing staff on a part-time basis at the Cleveland Clinic, so I have to basically be the producer of the data as well as a consumer. So Explorys, for those of you that don't know, is a cloud-based, which we can argue about what the word cloud-based means later. Big data, again, another buzzword we can talk about. Healthcare analytics platform that's been designed to leverage clinical information. One of the reasons why Explorys exists is because it's hard to leverage information, especially information that's being generated when the intended purpose is not yet known. The two goals that we had when we first started the company, and the two founders of the company, along with some of the IP that I helped spin off, were really in telecom and banking. And their goal was to unlock the potential of data, and they wanted to bring that to healthcare. Two goals. One was to drive net new knowledge, and the other one was to improve patient care. Both Clevelanders, the two founders, and both had extremely interesting, compelling healthcare stories, things that really got them motivated to be helping us take this to the next level. The company was actually formed technically in 2009, although discussion started probably sometime in 2008. We now currently have more than 75 hospitals in our network. And if you think about all the patients that are in the Explorys family, it's about 13 million patients. But those are all deduped, unique lives. If you actually ask all of our customers how many patients you have and add them all up, it's closer to 20 million. We've gotten a few recognitions along the way in our short span. And I'll tell you about what we do in a minute here. But just to give you a sense that Gartner, some of you may know, is a sort of an analytics and consulting firm. They try to size up companies and try to put them in different buckets of expertise and capabilities. Voted us one of the cool vendors in 2011. I'm not sure we want to be the cool vendor or the best vendor, but we'll take the cool vendor award. And then MedCity News awarded us a Startup of the Year recognition. Now, just to put things in perspective, these are our 10 integrated delivery networks that comprise of 75 plus hospitals. I think most of you will recognize the Northeast Ohio groups. We also have Catholic Health Partners down in Southeast Ohio, as well as Lancaster in Pennsylvania, St. Joe in Orange County, MedStar out in Baltimore, DC area, and Queens. The only reason we have Queens is because we like to go out to Hawaii. And we had folks lining up to take that implementation trip. Footprint-wise, we have patients that represent all 50 states. you can see where the provider organizations are stationed based on the density of the patients. And right now, our biggest footprint is obviously in the Midwest. Well, how did Explorys start? GQ alluded to the MyResearch application. I remember walking into our CIO's office when I was at the Cleveland Clinic. I was just beginning to get involved with the EMR rollout, and my goal was to do some secondary use of data. It was to take a program in which they were reviewing 25 charts to tell us how we were doing with diabetic care, and see if we, with our EMR rollout, convert that into a way that we could really change the way that we use the information to see how the physicians are performing. We also realized very early on that that same information, done properly and with IRB approval, could be used to jumpstart our patient identification process. Rather than walking through medical records and finding charts and looking through billing codes, you could use that same data to identify patients. And we needed a program around it. We needed to combine folks that were able to understand the EMR data with folks that were able to query the data. We formed a group called eResearch. I managed that group for a number of years, and along the way we saw common patterns of solutions that we need to deliver to our clients, who are for the most part internal. These are investigators and clinicians within the Cleveland Clinic, but there were also folks external, folks like in pharmaceutical companies who wanted to be able to partner with a Cleveland Clinic investigator and perform some sort of service. So we formed a group that was really there to be the interface between those who wanted to use the EMR and the ancillary databases for research, clinical trials, and those that can make it a little bit easier for them to do so. And that's the basis of how Explorys started. That information was, that IP was licensed along with the data to this company that was a Cleveland Clinic innovation spinoff. Big data, when I first started thinking about all the data that's in our system, and right now our back-end database, our EMR database is probably 10 terabytes. That's small. Most clinical information systems, it's not necessarily the text in the notes and the diagnoses and procedures. It's all the other stuff, all the imaging data, the genomic data, all the access logs to figure out how clinicians actually interacted with systems. When you start thinking about all that, you start getting into a significant size in terms of volume. And so we start thinking about, my partner, Charlie Lougheed, who's the president of the company, who's been involved with banking and online banking and telecom, he talks about 3 V's in big data, which are velocity, volume, and variety. I add 2 more. I look at variability, meaning that the same thing could come in multiple forms, and then the last one I add is value. If there's no value for anyone, it's not necessarily important data. I think this has been mentioned by both Brian and Michael. The idea of big data from a sustainable commercial entity like ours, the first question I always got asked was, well, does this make sense in the marketplace? Is someone going to pay for this? How does this resonate with investors? And we are a venture capital-backed company, so it's always on the back of our minds is what are we doing that's going to be revenue accretive and is going to propel us in a way that makes sense. And so we rely on folks like McKinsey and other consulting firms. And when McKinsey puts a big data opportunity or potential index up, we want to see where life science is and we want to see where healthcare is. We want to make sure it's not down here. We want to make sure it's high up because that's how investors will look at a company, but that's also how our peers and we all look at different forms of technology. So why now? Why is big data such a big deal in healthcare? It's not just the genomics. It's not just the imaging data that needs to be stored. It's, I believe, at least in the marketplace, this fear that the big drivers for data are not being currently met by current traditional technologies. We have the stimulus bill giving money to docs and hospitals to get EMRs. These EMRs having a certain data footprint, if you will. We have information flowing through HIEs, or at least the early stages of HIEs. And the Affordable Care Act is now requiring us to be measuring things, which means you need to have data in order to do these things. So there's a huge generation of data occurring just because we're in that period of time where this is important to people. And of course, we have new data sources, not just the new devices that can do a genome study for $400 in 4 hours, but also a bed in a hospital that monitors the pressure that the patient is having, and it does so every 5 seconds, or a smart pump, or a new joint replacement that measures the pressure on the joint and sends all this data. Where's all this information going and how are we dealing with it? This is one of my favorite slides, which talks about the whole idea of data overload. And we used to have a slide here that was a donkey up in the air with the data, with all the packs and the thing, but we were concerned about animal activists who might have a problem with the donkey up in the air, so we changed something a little bit less controversial. The idea being, though, that there's a huge load that we all are dealing with, and most CMIOs and CIOs in healthcare have been asked this question: what are you doing to deal with your data problem? And they're asking for two reasons. It's not just that they don't want their CIOs to be spending more and more money on data centers, but they're hearing about the cloud. They're hearing about other industries taking advantage of the cloud, and they really want to know what our healthcare system is doing about lowering their average cost of storage and retrieval and archival. The ability to make data more transparent. We had one particular customer who they had a big problem with getting their providers to actually use the EMR in a meaningful way. When they saw the ability to unlock that data and have it there immediately, as opposed to going through some of the rigmarole that you have to with some of the back-end databases, all of a sudden their ability to put the right information in the right box in an EMR dramatically increased. The other, I think, value proposition is that, again, Michael and Brian's group it may not be the case for them, but we need to get folks to focus on their core competencies. Does a healthcare group want to be in the data center business? Do they want to be in the data management business? Do they want to try to hire the DBA at the same level as they're trying to hire a clinical researcher who can make use of the data if it was made available in a different way? The other problem is that now we're getting all these new functionality into EMRs. There's a greater demand on the part of the EMR implementation teams or the IT teams or the informatics teams to really use it for things other than just clinical care. And obviously research and clinical trial participation is one of the big ones. And of course the analytics, the more data you have, the more tools that folks see outside in other industries, they expect us to be able to do this in the healthcare space. And so we need to be able to meet those demands. When I first started using EMR data for any kind of work in research, the first thing people said to me was, "You're crazy, you can't use EMR data for research. It wasn't collected in a pristine way. No one's going to be convinced that this can be done." And for the most part, it was an upward battle. I don't know how many of you guys are using EMR data for research right now, but it's an upward battle. It's not perfect, and you got to deal with a lot of things. Most of those are socio-technical. There's an IT governance process. The EMR is not necessarily owned by the same folks or has the same value in terms of the research that doesn't have the same value as clinical care does. So how do you get them to be on the same table when you try to use it for research? Vendor issues. There are some vendors out there that don't let you have access to their back-end databases. You have to deal with those things. Then there's the overall data governance. How do you manage to make sure people have access to the data when they need to and don't have access to it when they don't need to, especially in the HIPAA high-tech realm and the OCR coming down with certain rules. Standardization. I remember our first NLP project where we looked, it wasn't NLP, I should say, regular expression matching, I got engineers in the room here, regular expression matching with semi-structured data, looking for the phrase or the word CP. In internal medicine, CP was clearly chest pain. In my practice, it was always chest pain. In a neurologist practice, it's going to be cerebral palsy. And so the idea that there's variability in the way that we use text and the way that we do some of these things, and then how do we keep it private and secure? How do we make sure that we understand how to interpret data across the enterprise when there's variability in adoption and workflow? There could be an entire group on a campus who are not using the EMR for entering their medications. And so if you were to draw up a conclusion about the use of a certain drug in the entire enterprise, you could get it wrong if you're not thinking about the workflow and who's adopted the EMR and who hasn't. Data quality and validation, I think you guys all understand the challenges with that. I'll give you a few examples, real-life examples of what we run into. Interpreting the data from the EMR is very, in some cases, significantly different and very nuanced than comparing it to administrative data sets that we often have access to from a population health or a administrative data set research point of view. And the sustainability, one of the biggest pet peeves I had was we would often have these really cool projects that were funded temporarily, but then there was no plan early on how do you sustain it beyond the funding cycle. How do you make sure that it lives beyond it? Because there's a lot of people investing a lot of energy into it. And one of the reasons why I thought about how do we take this to the next level and create Explorys was I didn't want things to disappear. And we didn't want to be tied into a revenue stream that may or may not be there in the future. You know, I think Michael alluded to this earlier in terms of the EMRs and their back-end systems and the Roach Motel. And part of the reason why I think it's so difficult is because oftentimes these systems were created over time. They're modules. And they were, functionality was added on, and there was no grand data model. There was no researcher in mind when they built these. There was no quality improvement individual in mind when they built these things. So the intent is for you not to read these tables. This is from an actual EMR. The intent is to show that just for a single domain of practice, this is just ambulatory. The complexity of what you would need to link up in order to get something useful, just like demographics with the diagnoses and their vital signs. We all know about the phenomenon of garbage in, garbage out. It's even worse when we clinicians are in front of the computer and we not only ask it to do things that it shouldn't be doing, but we do things to it in the interest of the patient or in the interest of our busy day that then affect everyone downstream from that point on. So, I mean, this is, you know, for me, one of the things that we often would be asked is, can you tell me what the mortality rate is from the EMR data for a certain condition or a certain series of things? Well, no, not just from EMR data. It's very difficult to do that. Even if you hit it against SSDI, then you have the SSDI issues. And now with the limitations in the use of Social Security numbers and all that, you know, it becomes even more challenging. The other issue is that it's not being collected in a prospective controlled manner. So the fact that someone did not document something does not mean they didn't have that condition, or that absence or the workflow that got that information in or left it out has any bearing on what that really means for that particular patient. And data entry errors are really common. And the best of EMRs, they don't have all the safety checks in place. So we, at the Cleveland Clinic, we would have lots and lots of folks who were 6 inches tall. Now, clearly, when I'm seeing a patient, that doesn't matter much because I can mentally transpose that into 6 foot tall, and I immediately know what the problem is. But for computers, it's a little bit more challenging, as you guys know. Do you throw the value out? Do you look at the prior one, the next one, and see how it panned out? And it's not an easy question, especially now if you start trying to identify obese patients. All of a sudden you have an obesity epidemic on your hands. And so these are real issues that we have to deal with EMRs. And I'm not going to say that doesn't happen in you know, the most pristine of clinical trials where you have double data entry. I'll show you some data on that too. But one of the other areas is medications. You know, our earliest work was with pharmaceutical companies and identifying patients who were on a medication. And I would always say, well, what do you mean on a medication? You mean that the patient actually took it? Well, we can't tell you that. How about the fact that the patient picked up the prescription? Well, unless you have claims data or you get ticklers back from the clearinghouses, we can't tell you that either. All we can say is that a prescription was generated for a specific drug. We can't even tell you in some cases that it wasn't switched for another drug when they went to their pharmacy. Now that's all changing. Now we have HIEs where they're getting data from these data warehouses. All of a sudden, you can start answering some of these questions. You also have medication reconciliation requirements, thanks to meaningful use, that are requiring physicians to remove medications that are no longer active and to update the medication list much more actively. So these things will improve over time. But diagnoses, you know, I would often be asked, well, can you tell when this patient had a stroke? No. I can tell you when they were hospitalized with a diagnosis of stroke. I can tell you when the doctor documented stroke. But even the CAT scan that might show a stroke, you don't necessarily know when the stroke actually happened. Certain diagnoses are used to order tests. We often will have patients with diabetes who don't have diabetes, but because they were ordering a test that had to do with diabetes, they use those kind of codes. So it's very challenging to make use of this data. What's even worse is that the government sort of fosters this problem. So here's an example of a rule that is being asked, a quality measure in which the inclusion criteria are listed out, and they're all administrative codes. There's no clinical codes here. It doesn't say anything about look at the clinical phenotype of this patient and determine whether they're truly diabetic or not. It says look for all these things. Well, we know how all these things get into the record. They're not done in a scientific way. They're done through the operations of a healthcare system. And so these are some of the things that you have to be careful about when you start using EMR data. Of course, you can start combining things, and I believe both Brian and Michael alluded to the whole Bayesian approach to this, combining multiple criteria so that you improve the chances that you're capturing the right kind of patients. And here's an example of a study. I certainly think that this is something we've been doing for a while now, is that if you really want a diabetic and you're absolutely 100% certain that misclassifying someone as a diabetic when they're not is going to be a big, big problem for you, well, make sure they're on an anti-diabetic medication. Make sure they have blood tests that show diabetes, and make sure they have the condition. You may miss a few patients, but at least you'll make sure you don't get anyone who's not diabetic. We did a chronic kidney disease registry at the Cleveland Clinic, and in the process of validating our registry, we had a bunch of comorbidities. And we had manual chart reviews among several of our colleagues, and they went through and tried to validate how good were the diagnoses. People would often ask me, well, what do I need to do in order to validate the data you provided me to do a study? I said, well, you need to actually open up the chart and read the chart and validate it until your statisticians are satisfied that you've looked at enough charts to get the kind of significance that you need in order to draw conclusions. Certainly, if this was a study in which we were looking only at diabetic nephropathy or only at hypertension, you'd want to make sure that these two numbers were compatible with the study question that you had in mind. Now, I was pretty impressed by these, by the way. I thought these were pretty good. And I think over time, the accuracy increases because this is Cleveland Clinic data. At the Cleveland Clinic, our accuracy of our EMR jumped significantly when we started with the patient portal. All of a sudden, when the patients were able to see their diagnoses at home, they would often call their providers up and say, hey, I don't have this condition, or you're missing something important, and the medical record was getting updated much more frequently. Here's an example of patient portal data where they've asked patients specific questions about their history. Then they looked at the gold standard, this I think was done at the VA, where they went back and tried to see how accurate was the patient. For things like A1C, 1% off, there was a pretty high number. But even things like a sigmoidoscopy or a proctoscopic exam, 22% of patients didn't remember having one. And that tells me that when we start having PHRs or patient portals that are bringing in information, we have to be very careful how that information gets into the medical record, but more importantly, how it gets into our research record. A lot more validation needs to be done. Patients need to be educated about data quality just as much as we do as clinicians and investigators. Now, one of the things that I'll often get asked is, well, how does this compare to a 21 CFR Part 11 compliant double data entry type of database? Well, when you look at the data in a traditional research database, these are two different studies that they showed that it's not that great either. Just because you ask someone to enter something twice doesn't mean that's going to be right. And just because you're doing it as part of a prospective clinical trial and you have people that are trained on this, there's still an error rate. So keeping that in mind, when people tell me EMR data is no good or EHR data is no good, I tell them, well, okay, go through the same rigors that you would using any other data and get it to the point where it's good enough to answer the questions that you have, because the alternatives are not exactly the gold standard either, and this is much more expensive than using EMR data that's collected through routine clinical care, or by extensions in the EMR to collect even additional care. So what's our approach? What did Explorys do? How do we tackle this particular problem? Oh, there we go. Okay. So what we did was we created a data grid. Now, this was not using a relational database. This was using Hadoop infrastructure that is much more robust at the kind of data that's coming in, high velocity, much lower cost. We built a curation engine around it. I'll show you a graphic on that. Built an attribution engine. Because we have 13 million patients from all different data sources, we need to know whose data it is. We need to know within an organization who the provider was. And we need to know which site or which group actually generated the data based on some of the stuff that we're doing. We created a bunch of applications that sit on the grid that allow you to explore this data at very high speed, very Google-esque, less than a second response time to get information back out of the system. We created think about it as a dashboard 2.0, a new generation dashboard that lets you have very high speed representation of quality metrics, performance metrics against that data grid on key performance characteristics that might be of interest to the organization based on national standards but locally vetted. registries, and the Engage piece is relatively new. We're still in development where we can go out to the patients and let them know that they're overdue for something. We can hit the PHR that the organization may have and send a message through there, through the HL7 gateway, et cetera. It's something very new, and I suspect whatever I say today is the application is going to be very different when we finally release it in third quarter. And then we have an informatics team that handles all the things that can't be done with our applications and can't be done by the skill sets available in our customer sites. Why should everyone have to reinvent the wheel? If we have a core set of services, all our customers can leverage it. The beauty of our system, and I think this is something which is catching on in a lot of, not just for Explorys, is an appliance that sits behind the firewall and essentially automagically siphons the data from the healthcare system, standardizes it, puts it into the cloud. This cloud is a private cloud. It's sitting in a data center in which Explorys as a company has ownership over the servers. It has ownership over the human assets that go in there and maintain it. And it's not an Amazon cloud. It's not a Google cloud or anything like that. It's our own private cloud. This is the curation process where we take all these diagnoses, procedures, drugs, observations, devices, and all that, and put them into a standard ontology. Now, clearly what's missing from here is any kind of research ontology. Our framework is pretty flexible. If someone said to us, here's our research data set, can you put it into the grid? We would be able to easily consume it into the grid and make it available through a search capability, just as we do with all the other data that you see here. Within the clinical research cycle, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but our goal was to see where Explorys could help us with all these different aspects of the research cycle. And we're starting out in a very, very, I would say, a deliberate way, thinking about just ad hoc exploration, research hypotheses, helping people model out a protocol and be able to obtain an identifiable set of patient records so that they can go out and recruit those patients. What we're not doing right now is we don't have a massive group right now doing data analysis. We rely on our customer partners to do that. And what we're not doing is we're not actually going out and reaching out to the patient and saying, are you interested in a trial? We make that available to the customer who then goes out and does this. We did a HIV clinical trial at the Cleveland Clinic in which all the patients were recruited using an Explorys list of patients. We know this works. We had I'm going to skip through some of this in the interest of time. Peter Emby, who's now at OSU, one of Phil's colleagues, when he was at the Cleveland Clinic, he and our team engaged in a project where we wanted to see whether we can build out a functionality within the EMR to recruit patients. We knew patients wanted it. We knew patients wanted to be offered clinical trials. Plenty of evidence on that. This is a Harris interactive poll that basically showed that patients want it, especially at places like the Cleveland Clinic, which is an academic medical center. We also knew that providers wanted to offer these trials to their patients, but were often hindered by the fact that there were dozens of trials, in some cases hundreds of trials going on at any one time, and they needed some easy way to get that information in front of them. So we went ahead and put up an alert within the electronic medical record, and there's a paper in Archives of Internal Medicine if you guys want to read it, but the bottom line is I don't need to point out when the alert went on. It's pretty obvious that this line, this light gray line, are all the referrals that were made to the research coordinator after the alert went on. But what's important here is that the black line, these are the number of enrolled patients, was actually a statistically significant increase as well. And in this particular trial, it was the nationwide Accord trial. We were a site. The PI and the nurse were ecstatic that we were able to help them with this. And we reproduced this a number of times in additional clinical trials, probably supported between a clinical trial alert and offline identification at the Cleveland Clinic, 40 trials. Explorys has supported, at least in our short infancy, about 4 or 5 trials, including trials at not just the Cleveland Clinic, but other facilities as well. We did a study where we looked at identification of these patients through the EMR from a data point of view, and we saw some very interesting things. We compared our list that we came up with through the precursor of Explorys, the MyResearch application, to the voluntary research list of the Severe Asthma Research Program. And we found that our list did pretty well. We end up having an accelerated enrollment. We got 93 out of 540 patients that had to be screened, 93 versus the the voluntary list, which is 24 versus 109. So given the fact that we almost multiplied the number of patients by 4, we were willing to accept a certain number of screening failures in that process. But here's the other thing that was really cool, was that the diversity had been increased. Because we know that the volunteer registries are not biased, but they're lopsided, if you will. The EMR is kind of blind to some of those issues and was able to identify some of these folks in a much more diverse way. So I'm going to shift focus, if I have another 4 minutes, I just want to shift focus real quickly to healthcare. You know, at the end of the day, the reason why we do all this stuff is to actually improve the population, the health of the population. If we can't do that, and all as a company we do is support research, I think we'd be happy, but we wouldn't be satisfied. So our take on it, and our customers' take on it, was we know there's a huge healthcare problem. We're spending an outrageous amount of money compared to other countries with very little to show. This is an Institute of Medicine report. We're all familiar with this from 2001. It showed how poorly we were doing, the medical errors that were occurring, and how much money we were spending. Well, they revisited this in 2011, and our report card, national scorecard, did not look much better. So we know that there's a huge problem, and we think that data has something to do with it. We also know there's huge pressures that we are all facing around healthcare reform, payment reform. Despite what ends up happening in Congress, we know there's going to be some flavor of payment reform, and we need to be getting our organizations ready for it. We also know that when you look at the data, it's pretty compelling. The biggest impact any of these things have, here's health IT over here, by the way, medical homes, which a lot of places are doing. The biggest impact in studies is bundled payments, but no one really knows how to analyze all this data to figure out what a bundle looks like. NQF has a framework which is wonderful. They talk about risk, before the patient gets the disease, the evaluation, and then the follow-up care. What we're trying to do is use big data across all our patients to create these episodes, to create these patient profiles, and see if we can impact the different stages of care through these different healthcare reform models. Here's a screen of our dashboard. You can see the typical my patients, my group's patient. These are synthetic data. These are not really my patients. My numbers are far better than these. And then be able to plot them and do so in a big data, Web 2.0. Everyone's using an iPad. They want to see things visually. And that's what we're trying to do with our approach, is not just a back-end big data infrastructure, but a front-end Web 2.0, a visual experience that lets them drive to the answers. And one screen, see how a group is doing, see where the problem areas are for all providers, whereas a problem area for only some providers. These are things that our customers are demanding and wanting, and we're delivering them through this infrastructure. Plotting a process measure, like did you check a patient's hemoglobin A1C against an outcome? How well did the patient's hemoglobin A1C do? And seeing, is there a correlation? We assume a lot of things about quality measures. We assume that if we do the right thing will happen to the patient. But there's a lot of assumptions being made, and with a high enough number of patients, we can really look and see whether that holds true. So I know there's a lot more I could do. When I found out that we had 25 minutes to do this, all my colleagues said, how are you going to do this in 25 minutes? But I'm around the rest of the afternoon, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much.